I never thought a birthday party could go so terribly wrong. It was supposed to be a joyful celebration for my husband, Michael, but instead, it turned into a nightmare that would change our lives forever. The day started like any other Saturday in our suburban Boston home. I woke up early, excited to put the finishing touches on the party preparations. Michael and I had been married for 5 years, and I wanted to make his 35th birthday special. We'd invited friends, family, and even some of his co-workers from the law firm where he worked as a junior partner. As I hung streamers and arranged flowers, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Our house, a charming colonial we'd purchased just 2 years ago, was the perfect setting for such a gathering. The hardwood floors gleamed, and the newly renovated kitchen was ready to impress our guests. I'd spent weeks planning every detail, from the menu to the playlist of Michael's favorite songs. The first guests began to arrive around 4 p.m. Our friend Sarah, a bubbly redhead who worked as a kindergarten teacher, showed up with her husband Tom in tow. "Ko, this place looks amazing," she exclaimed, handing me a beautifully wrapped gift. I beamed at the compliment, ushering them into the living room where Michael was chatting with his college roommate, Dave. As more people filtered in, the house filled with the buzz of conversation and laughter. I flitted from group to group, making sure everyone had drinks and hors d'oeuvres. Michael's colleagues from the firm arrived, looking slightly out of place in their casual wear. I was used to seeing them in suits and ties at the occasional office function. Everything seemed perfect, but there was an undercurrent of tension I couldn't quite shake. It centered around one person, Evelyn, Michael's mother. From the moment she arrived, fashionably late and dressed to the nines in a designer pantsuit, I felt on edge. Evelyn had never approved of me, viewing our marriage as a step down for her precious son. She'd made it clear on numerous occasions that she thought Michael could have done better than marrying a simple graphic designer like me. I tried to push those thoughts aside and focus on being a good hostess. After all, this party wasn't just about celebrating Michael's birthday, it was also a way to show our appreciation to everyone who had supported us over the years. From our neighbors who'd welcomed us to the neighborhood to Michael's mentors at the firm who'd helped him climb the corporate ladder, we wanted to thank them all. As the evening progressed, I noticed Evelyn giving me sly looks and muttering under her breath. At first, I tried to ignore it, chalking it up to her usual behavior. But her comments grew louder, clearly meant for others to hear. "I can't believe she didn't get proper catering," she said to one of Michael's aunts. "A daughter-in-law should know how to throw a proper party." I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment, but I plastered on a smile and continued to mingle. Michael seemed oblivious to his mother's jabs, caught up in conversations with his work friends. I longed to pull him aside and ask for his support, but I didn't want to cause a scene. This was his day, after all. The party reached its peak when it was time to bring out the cake. I'd splurged on a massive 3-tiered red velvet cake from the best bakery in town. As I carried it out, candles blazing, everyone gathered around to sing happy birthday. Michael's face lit up, and for a moment, I forgot about all the tension. This was why I'd done all this, to see that smile on his face. After the cake was cut and distributed, I thought the worst was behind us. How wrong I was. As the party began to wind down, with only close family and a few stragglers remaining, Evelyn cleared her throat loudly. "I think it's time for the main event," she announced, her voice carrying across the room. Confused, I looked at Michael. He stood next to his mother, an unreadable expression on his face. That's when Evelyn dropped the bombshell that would shatter our world. "As you all know," she began, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "family is everything to us. And tonight, we have a grand gesture to make." My heart began to race as I sensed something was terribly wrong. Michael's voice, when he spoke, was cold and rehearsed. "I think it's time we gift my mother the house," he said, not meeting my eyes. For a moment, I was sure I'd misheard. Gift the house? Our house? The one we'd saved for years to buy, the one I'd poured my heart and soul into making our home? I blinked, trying to process what was happening. Evelyn, a triumphant smirk on her face, slid a stack of legal documents onto the coffee table. Her fiery red nails tapped against the surface impatiently. "Just sign the papers, Ko," she said flatly. "You live in it now, but it should belong to family, someone who knows what sacrifice means." I felt as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. The remaining guests shifted uncomfortably, clearly sensing the tension but unsure of what to do. I looked around, hoping to see a friendly face, someone who would stand up and say this was all a terrible joke. But everyone averted their eyes, suddenly finding the carpet or their drinks intensely interesting. "I don't understand," I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. "Michael, what's going on?" But Michael wouldn't look at me. He kept his gaze fixed on a point somewhere over my shoulder. "It's for the best, Ko," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Mom needs a place to stay, and this house is too big for just the two of us anyway." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This house, our home, had been our dream. We'd spent countless weekends house hunting, arguing over paint colors, and planning our future here. And now, on what was supposed to be a day of celebration, they wanted me to just sign it away. "No," I said, surprised by the firmness in my voice. "I won't sign anything. This is our home, Michael. We built this together." Evelyn's face twisted into an ugly scowl. "Don't be difficult, dear," she hissed. "This is what's best for the family. Don't you want what's best for Michael?" I felt tears pricking at the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them back. I wouldn't give Evelyn the satisfaction of seeing me cry. "This isn't about what's best for Michael," I said, my voice growing stronger. "This is about you, Evelyn. It's always been about you." The room fell silent, the tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. I looked at Michael, silently pleading with him to say something, to stand up for me, for us. But he just stood there, a statue next to his mother, his face an expressionless mask. In that moment, I realized that the man I thought I knew, the man I had married and built a life with, was a stranger to me. How long had they been planning this? How many nights had Michael lain beside me, knowing that he was going to betray me in the cruelest way possible? As the reality of the situation sank in, I felt a strange calm settle over me. This wasn't just about a house. It was about respect, trust, and the very foundation of our marriage. And in one fell swoop, Michael and Evelyn had shattered it all. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and looked Evelyn directly in the eye. "I won't sign," I repeated, my voice clear and unwavering. "This is my home, and I won't let you take it from me." The room erupted into chaos. Evelyn began shrieking about ungrateful daughters-in-law and family duty. The remaining guests started to gather their things, eager to escape the drama. And Michael just stood there, silent and immobile, as everything we had built together crumbled around us. As I stood my ground, I knew that this birthday party was just the beginning. The coming days would test me in ways I never imagined, but in that moment, I found a strength I didn't know I possessed. Whatever came next, I was ready to face it head-on. The room fell silent as I stood my ground, refusing to sign away our home. I could feel the weight of countless eyes fixed on me, a mixture of shock, pity, and morbid curiosity etched on their faces. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. I glanced at Michael, silently pleading for some form of support, some sign that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. Instead, he crossed his arms and nodded toward the papers, a silent demand to obey. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This wasn't just shocking, it was a calculated ambush. "I won't sign," I repeated, my voice trembling but resolute. The air grew thick with tension, and Evelyn's face twisted into an even deeper scowl. She took a step towards me, her designer heels clicking ominously on the hardwood floor. "Don't embarrass yourself, dear," she hissed, her voice low and menacing. "And don't disrespect my son." Her eyes flashed dangerously, and for a moment, I was reminded of a predator cornering its prey. But I refused to be intimidated. This wasn't just a house, it was my home, the one I had worked tirelessly to build with Michael. It wasn't her right to take it from me, no matter what customs or expectations she wanted to impose. I looked around the room, hoping to find an ally among our guests. Sarah, my supposed friend, avoided my gaze, suddenly fascinated by the pattern on her dress. Dave, Michael's college roommate, shifted uncomfortably and muttered something about needing another drink. Even our neighbors, the Johnsons, who had welcomed us so warmly when we first moved in, were edging towards the door, clearly eager to escape the unfolding drama. "This isn't right," I said, my voice growing stronger as I faced Evelyn. "You can't just come in here and demand we give you our home. We bought this house, Michael and I. We've put our hearts and souls into making it a home. It's not yours to take." Evelyn's nostrils flared, and I could almost see steam coming out of her ears. "You ungrateful little dash," she began, but Michael cut her off. "Enough," he said, his voice cold and hard. I turned to him, hope flickering in my chest. Surely now he would stand up for me, for us. But as I met his eyes, I saw nothing but anger and disappointment. "Just sign the papers, Ko. Don't make this any harder than it needs to be." I felt as if I'd been slapped. "Michael," I whispered, "how can you do this? This is our home. We chose it together, remember? We talked about raising our children here, growing old together. How can you just give it away?" For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. But then Evelyn placed a hand on his shoulder, and his expression hardened once more. "It's for the best," he said flatly. "Mom needs a place to stay, and this house is too big for us anyway. We can find somewhere else." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was the man I had married, the man I thought I knew better than anyone else in the world. Yet here he was, siding with his mother over me, willing to throw away everything we had built together. "No," I said, shaking my head. "I won't do it. This is wrong, Michael. Can't you see that? Can't you see what she's doing to us?" Evelyn's face contorted with rage. "How dare you?" she shrieked. "After everything we've done for you. Michael, are you going to let her speak to me like this?" That's when things took the ugliest turn imaginable. Michael's face flushed red with fury, his eyes blazing with an anger I'd never seen before. Without warning, he strode over to the table where the remnants of his birthday cake Saturday. It was still a beautiful sight, despite being partially eaten, 3 tiers of red velvet perfection, covered in smooth cream cheese frosting and decorated with intricate sugar flowers. I had spent days planning it, working with the bakery to get every detail just right. In one swift motion, Michael picked up the cake platter. For a split second, I thought he was going to throw it at the wall or smash it on the floor. But then his eyes locked with mine, and I realized with horror what he was about to do. "You're humiliating us," he barked, and then he launched the cake directly at my face. Time seemed to slow down. I saw the cake flying towards me, a blur of red and white. I heard gasps echoing through the room. And then, impact. The cake hit me with surprising force, splattering across my face, hair, and clothes. Frosting and crumbs went everywhere in my eyes, up my nose, down my neck and onto my favorite dress. For a moment, there was complete silence. I stood there, frozen in shock, cake dripping down my face. The room spun around me, and I felt as if I might faint. This couldn't be happening. This had to be some sort of terrible nightmare. But it was all too real. As I wiped frosting from my eyes, I saw Evelyn's triumphant smirk, heard her barely suppressed laughter. Michael stood there, chest heaving, his hands still sticky with frosting. Our guests were a mixture of horrified faces and averted gazes, no one quite sure how to react to this shocking turn of events. "Sign the papers now," Michael demanded, his voice hoarse with anger. Evelyn seized the moment, slamming the pen onto the table and glaring at me. "You heard him," she snarled. "Just sign." I looked at the pen, then at the papers, then at Michael and Evelyn. In that moment, something inside me snapped. Not in the way they wanted. I didn't break down or give in. Instead, I felt a surge of strength, of righteous anger. Without a word, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving a trail of cake crumbs and frosting in my wake. I could hear Evelyn's indignant sputtering behind me, Michael's angry calls for me to come back. But I ignored them all. I walked straight out the front door, down the porch steps, and onto the sidewalk. I had no idea where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay in that house a moment longer. As I walked down the street, still covered in cake, I became aware of the stares of my neighbors. Mrs. Rodriguez, watering her prized roses, dropped her watering can in shock. Mr. Thompson, out for his evening jog, nearly tripped over his own feet as he gaped at me. Under normal circumstances, I would have been mortified. But right then, I couldn't bring myself to care. I walked for what felt like hours, though it was probably only about 30 minutes. The cool evening air helped clear my head, and the sticky feeling of drying frosting on my skin kept me grounded in reality. As I walked, I replayed the events of the evening in my mind, trying to make sense of what had happened. How had a birthday party turned into such a nightmare? How could Michael, the man I loved and trusted, betray me so completely? And what was I going to do now? Eventually, I found myself outside Sarah's house. Despite her earlier reluctance to get involved, she was still my oldest friend in Boston. I hesitated for a moment, then rang the doorbell. When Sarah opened the door and saw me standing there, covered in cake and looking shell-shocked, her eyes widened in horror. "Oh my God, Ko," she gasped. "What happened? Are you okay?" I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, to my surprise and embarrassment, I burst into tears. Sarah immediately pulled me into a hug, not caring about the frosting getting on her own clothes. "Come in," she said gently, leading me inside. "Let's get you cleaned up, and then you can tell me everything." As Sarah helped me wash the cake out of my hair and lent me some clean clothes, I poured out the whole story. To her credit, she listened without interrupting, her face a mixture of shock, anger, and sympathy. "I can't believe Michael did that," she said when I'd finished. "And Evelyn, well, actually, I can believe that from her. But Michael? That's just... I'm so sorry, Ko." I nodded, feeling numb. "I don't know what to do now," I admitted. "I can't go back there. Not tonight. Maybe not ever." Sarah squeezed my hand. "You'll stay here tonight," she said firmly. "We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. For now, you need to rest." As I lay in Sarah's spare room that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Michael's face contorted with rage, felt the impact of the cake hitting me. I thought about our house, my house, and wondered what would happen now. Would Evelyn move in tomorrow? Would Michael let her? But beneath the hurt and betrayal, I felt something else stirring. A determination. A resolve. I might have walked out covered in cake, but I wasn't defeated. Not by a long shot. Whatever came next, I would face it head on. This wasn't over, it was just the beginning. Sleep eluded me that night in Sarah's spare room. The digital alarm clock on the nightstand seemed to mock me with its relentless march of minutes, each one a reminder of how my life had been turned upside down in the span of a single evening. The room felt alien, the unfamiliar scent of Sarah's laundry detergent on the sheets, the quiet hum of an air conditioner I wasn't used to, the shadows cast by streetlights filtering through curtains that weren't mine. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, endlessly replaying what had happened. The shock of Michael's betrayal, the humiliation of having a cake thrown in my face, the crushing realization that my marriage might be over, it all swirled in my mind like a toxic whirlpool. I felt lost, adrift in a sea of uncertainty, clinging to the wreckage of what I thought was a happy life. As the night wore on, my thoughts drifted to happier times. I remembered the day Michael and I first met, at a coffee shop near Boston Common. He'd accidentally spilled his latte on my sketchbook, and in his flustered attempts to clean it up, he'd made me laugh. That laughter had been the start of something beautiful, or so I thought. I recalled our first date, a picnic in the public garden. Michael had packed a ridiculous amount of food, as if he was afraid I might starve during our 2-hour date. We'd talked for hours, feeding the ducks and getting to know each other. I remembered thinking how kind his eyes were, how his smile made me feel safe and cherished. Then there was the day he proposed, on a weekend trip to Cape Cod. We'd walked along the beach at sunset, and he'd gotten down on one knee in the sand. I'd been so happy, so sure that we were embarking on a lifetime of love and partnership. How naive I'd been. But now, in the quiet of Sarah's spare room, those memories felt tainted. Had it all been a lie? Had Michael always been capable of such cruelty, and I'd just been too blind to see it? Or had something changed along the way, turning the man I loved into someone I hardly recognized? I thought about Evelyn, her smug face as she'd presented those papers. How long had she been planning this? Had she always seen me as a temporary inconvenience, someone to be discarded when the time was right? I felt a surge of anger, not just at Evelyn, but at myself for not standing up to her sooner. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky outside, I found myself thinking about the house. Our house. My house. I thought about the months we'd spent house hunting, the excitement when we'd finally found the perfect place. I remembered the weekends spent painting walls, the arguments over furniture placement, the dinner parties we'd hosted. Every room held memories, every corner a piece of the life we'd built together. And now, Evelyn wanted to take it all away. She wanted to erase me from that house as if I'd never existed. The thought made my blood boil. This wasn't just about bricks and mortar, it was about my life, my dreams, my future. I'd poured my heart and soul into making that house a home, and I wasn't going to let it go without a fight. I must have dozed off at some point because I woke with a start to the sound of birds chirping outside. Sunlight was streaming through the gaps in the curtains, and for a moment, I was disoriented. Then the memories of the previous night came flooding back, and I felt a fresh wave of pain wash over me. Reaching for my phone on the nightstand, I saw that it was just past 7 a.m. I had several missed calls and messages, all from Michael. My heart leaped into my throat as I debated whether to listen to them. Part of me hoped that he was calling to apologize, to tell me it had all been a terrible mistake. But another part, a stronger part, knew better. With trembling fingers, I played the first voicemail. Michael's voice, slightly slurred as if he'd been drinking, filled the room. "Ko, where are you? Come home. We need to talk about this. You're being ridiculous." I deleted it without listening to the rest. The text messages were no better. A mix of angry demands to know where I was and half-hearted attempts at justification. "Mom needs our help," one read. "You're being selfish," said another. Not a single apology, not one acknowledgement of how deeply he'd hurt me. I put the phone down, feeling a strange mix of disappointment and relief. Disappointment that Michael hadn't miraculously turned back into the man I thought I'd married, but relief that I hadn't been swayed by false apologies or empty promises. Sarah knocked softly on the door a little while later, poking her head in with a concerned smile. "Hey," she said gently. "How are you feeling?" I sat up, running a hand through my tangled hair. "Like I've been hit by a truck," I admitted. "A truck carrying a load of betrayal and cake frosting." Sarah's smile turned sympathetic as she came to sit on the edge of the bed. "I made coffee," she offered. "And I called in sick to work today. I thought you might need a friend." Gratitude washed over me. "Thanks, Sarah," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Over coffee and toast, I filled Sarah in on the messages from Michael. She listened, her face growing stormier with each word. "He's got some nerve," she muttered. "Throwing a cake at you and then acting like you're the one being unreasonable." I nodded, staring into my coffee cup. "I keep thinking about the house," I admitted. "About all the work we put into it, all the plans we had. I can't believe he's willing to just give it away." Sarah reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "What are you going to do?" It was the question I'd been asking myself all night. What was I going to do? The thought of going back to that house, of facing Michael and Evelyn, made my stomach churn. But the thought of giving up, of letting them win, was even worse. "I don't know," I said slowly. "But I know I'm not going to let them bully me out of my own home. I worked hard for that house, Sarah. It's as much mine as it is Michael's, maybe even more so. I'm the one who chose the paint colors, who planted the garden, who made it a home. I'm not going to let Evelyn waltz in and take it all away." Sarah nodded approvingly. "That's the Ko I know," she said. "So, what's the first step?" I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of purpose starting to take shape. I think I need to talk to a lawyer," I said. "I need to know my rights, what my options are." "That's a good idea," Sarah agreed. "I have a friend who specializes in family law. I can give her a call if you want." I nodded gratefully. "Yes, please. And I think I need to go back to the house today. Not to stay," I added quickly, seeing the alarm on Sarah's face. "But to get some of my things. And to let Michael know that this isn't over." Sarah looked worried. "Are you sure that's a good idea? Maybe you should wait a few days, let things cool down." But I shook my head, feeling more certain by the minute. "No, I need to do this now. If I wait, Evelyn might already be moving in. I need to stake my claim, to show them I'm not backing down. Sarah studied me for a moment, then nodded. Okay, she said. But I'm coming with you. You shouldn't have to face them alone. As we finished our coffee and started to get ready, I felt a mix of emotions swirling inside me. Fear, anger, determination, and underneath it all, a deep sadness for what I'd lost. But I also felt something else, something new and powerful, resolve. I might have spent the night in tears, but I was done being the victim. Michael and Evelyn had picked the wrong woman to mess with. They thought they could bully me, humiliate me, and push me out of my own life. They were about to learn how wrong they were. As I borrowed some of Sarah's clothes and prepared to face the day, I made a promise to myself. This was my life, my home, and my future. And I was going to fight for it with everything I had. The drive back to my house felt surreal. Sarah was behind the wheel of her compact car, navigating the familiar streets of our Boston suburb. I sat in the passenger seat, my heart pounding with a mixture of anxiety and determination. The morning sun cast long shadows across the road, and I couldn't help but feel like I was heading into battle. As we turned onto my street, I felt a jolt of surprise. A large moving truck was parked in front of my house, and several boxes were stacked neatly in the driveway. For a moment, panic seized me. Had Michael already started moving my things out? But as we got closer, I realized something was off. Those weren't my belongings scattered across the lawn. I recognized Evelyn's gaudy decorations, the hideous family portraits she had insisted we hang up, and various knickknacks she had temporarily stored in our home over the years. Sarah whistled low. Looks like someone's been busy, she murmured as she pulled up to the curb. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. Let's do this, I said, more to myself than to Sarah. As we approached the house, the front door swung open. Michael stood on the porch, his face pale and drawn. He looked like he hadn't slept all night, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled. When he saw me, his eyes widened with a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Ko," he called out, his voice hoarse. "Where have you been? I've been trying to reach you all night." I ignored him, my eyes scanning the scene before me. That's when I spotted Evelyn, emerging from behind the moving truck. She was dressed in one of her typical designer outfits, looking completely out of place among the boxes and general disarray. When Evelyn saw me, her face went through a series of rapid transformations: confusion, anger, and then shock as she realized what was happening to her belongings. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice shrill. "Michael, what's going on?" I stepped forward, feeling a surge of confidence. "I'm reclaiming my space," I said simply, my voice steady and clear. "Your things are no longer welcome here, Evelyn." Michael descended the porch steps, his face a mask of confusion and anger. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice trembling with barely contained rage. "You can't just dash." "Actually, I can," I interrupted, meeting his gaze squarely. "This is my home, Michael. Mine and yours. Not your mother's." Evelyn's face contorted with fury. She stepped forward, her designer heels sinking slightly into the soft grass of the lawn. "You ungrateful little dash," she began, but I cut her off. "I wouldn't finish that sentence if I were you, Evelyn," I said, my voice icy. "Not unless you want it used against you in court." That stopped her cold. "Court?" she sputtered. "What are you talking about?" I smiled faintly, feeling a sense of control I hadn't experienced in years. "Oh, did I forget to mention? I brought someone with me." I turned slightly, gesturing to the car where a sharply dressed woman was now emerging. "This is Ms. Wright. She's here to ensure that everyone understands their legal boundaries, starting today." Ms. Wright, the lawyer Sarah had connected me with, approached with a confident stride. She carried a sleek briefcase and wore an expression that meant business. "Good morning," she said crisply. "I believe we have some matters to discuss." The color drained from Evelyn's face as she stared at Ms. Wright. Michael looked between us, his expression a mixture of shock and growing realization. "Ko," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Can we talk about this privately?" I shook my head. "Anything you have to say, you can say in front of Ms. Wright." And Sarah, I added, nodding to my friend who stood nearby, a silent pillar of support. Michael ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "You're blowing everything out of proportion. We were just trying to help Mom Dash by throwing me out of my own home," I interrupted, feeling a flash of anger. "By ambushing me at a birthday party and demanding I sign away my rights? That's not help, Michael. That's manipulation and abuse." Evelyn, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly found her voice. "You can't do this," she hissed, her eyes darting between me and Ms. Wright. "This house should belong to family." I felt a calm settle over me as I met her gaze. "I am family, Evelyn. Or at least, I was. But you never saw me that way, did you? I was always just an inconvenience, someone to be tolerated until you could find a way to push me out." Ms. Wright stepped forward, her presence commanding attention. "Mrs. Evelyn," she said, her tone professional but with an edge of steel, "I must advise you to cease any further harassment or interference with Ms. Keogh's property. We've documented the incidents from last night and have sufficient evidence to proceed legally if necessary." Evelyn's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. For perhaps the first time since I'd known her, she seemed at a loss for words. Michael, however, was far from silent. "You can't do this," he shouted, his face flushed with anger. "You're ruining everything. Do you have any idea what this will do to my career, to our reputation?" I met his glare with a calmness I hadn't felt in years. "No, Michael. You ruined everything the moment you chose your mother over me. The moment you decided that her wishes were more important than our marriage, our home, our life together." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years of suppressed feelings finally lifting. "I've given you more chances than you ever deserved, but this..." I gestured vaguely at the driveway and the paper-stained memories of the night before. "This was the last straw." Sarah stepped up beside me, placing a supportive hand on my shoulder. "I think it's time for you both to leave," she said firmly to Michael and Evelyn. "Keogh has made her position clear." Evelyn, realizing she was cornered, attempted to compose herself. Her face settled into a mask of cold fury as she spat out one final threat. "You'll regret this, Keogh. Don't think for a second you've won." But her bravado was hollow, and we all knew it. Without another word, she turned on her heel and stalked towards her car, her movements stiff with suppressed rage. Michael hesitated, his shoulders slumping in defeat. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the man I had fallen in love with, vulnerable, uncertain. "Where am I supposed to go?" he asked, his voice weak and lost. For a brief moment, pity flickered through me. We had shared a life, dreams, and plans for the future. But then I remembered the cake smashing into my face, the cruel words, the betrayal, and my resolve hardened. "That's not my problem anymore, Michael," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. "You made your choice. Now you have to live with it." He stared at me for a long moment, a myriad of emotions crossing his face. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, following his mother to the car. As they drove off, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness wash over me. A chapter of my life was ending, but another was just beginning. Ms. Wright turned to me, her expression softening slightly. "You did well," she said. "Now, let's go inside and discuss our next steps. We have a lot of work to do to ensure your rights are protected." I nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude for this woman's professionalism and support. Sarah squeezed my arm encouragingly, and together, we walked into the house, my house. As I crossed the threshold, I paused for a moment, taking in the familiar sights and scents. This space that had been filled with tension and pain just hours ago now felt different. It felt like a blank canvas, ready for me to recreate my life on my own terms. I turned to Sarah and Ms. Wright, a small smile playing on my lips. "Well," I said, "I guess it's time to start moving forward." And with that, we stepped inside, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The road wouldn't be easy, I knew, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to walk it, on my own terms, with my head held high. The weeks following the confrontation were a whirlwind of legal meetings, emotional upheavals, and small victories. Ms. Wright, my lawyer, proved to be a godsend. Her calm demeanor and razor-sharp mind helped me navigate the complexities of my situation with a confidence I didn't know I possessed. Our first order of business was to file for divorce. The decision wasn't easy, but after what Michael had done, I knew there was no going back. As Ms. Wright explained the process, I felt a mix of sadness and relief. This wasn't how I had imagined my marriage ending, but I knew it was necessary. "Remember," Ms. Wright said during one of our meetings, her eyes kind but firm, "boundaries are non-negotiable. We're not just fighting for your house, Ko. We're fighting for your right to live your life on your own terms." Those words became my mantra in the days that followed. Every time I felt weak or doubted my decisions, I reminded myself, boundaries are non-negotiable. The legal proceedings were grueling. Michael, urged on by Evelyn no doubt, contested everything. They claimed that I had abandoned the marital home, that I was emotionally unstable, that I had always intended to take advantage of Michael's success. Each accusation hurt, but I refused to let them see me falter. Instead, I threw myself into building my case. I gathered financial records showing my contributions to our household. I collected statements from friends and neighbors attesting to my character and my dedication to our home. And, perhaps most damning of all, I had the photos and witness accounts of the birthday party incident. "They're trying to paint you as the villain," Ms. Wright explained one afternoon as we pored over documents in her office. "But we have the truth on our side. And the truth is, you were the victim of emotional abuse and manipulation." Hearing those words, emotional abuse, was like a punch to the gut. Part of me wanted to deny it, to believe that our marriage couldn't have been that bad. But as I looked back on the years with Michael, I began to see patterns I had overlooked before. The constant criticism, the way he always deferred to his mother's wishes, the subtle undermining of my confidence. It had all been there, I just hadn't wanted to see it. While the legal battle raged on, I focused on reclaiming my space and my life. I repainted the living room, choosing a soothing sage green that I had always loved but Michael had vetoed. I rearranged the furniture, donated the items that held painful memories, and slowly began to make the house feel like my home again. Sarah was my rock through it all. She helped me pack up Michael's things, listened to me rant and cry, and reminded me to eat when I got too caught up in my thoughts. "You're the strongest person I know," she told me one evening as we shared a bottle of wine on my newly arranged patio. "Don't let them make you forget that." But it wasn't just Sarah. To my surprise, I found support from unexpected quarters. Mrs. Johnson, our next-door neighbor who had seemed so eager to escape during the birthday party disaster, showed up one day with a casserole and a hug. "I should have said something that night," she admitted, her eyes misty. "I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you, dear. But I want you to know, we're all rooting for you now." Her words meant more than she could know. Slowly, I began to realize that I wasn't alone in this fight. My community, the very one Evelyn had tried to turn against me, was rallying around me instead. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were days when the weight of everything felt crushing. Days when I'd wake up reaching for Michael, only to remember he was gone. Days when I'd see happy couples on the street and feel a pang of what could have been. But I refused to let those moments define me. Instead, I channeled my energy into rebuilding my life. I threw myself into my graphic design work, taking on new clients and pushing my creative boundaries. I started volunteering at a local women's shelter, finding healing in helping others who had been through similar situations. And through it all, I held firm to my boundaries. When Michael tried to reach out, sending texts that alternated between angry accusations and pleas for reconciliation, I didn't respond. When Evelyn attempted to corner me at the grocery store, launching into a tirade about family loyalty, I simply walked away. "You can't ignore us forever," she had shouted after me. But I could, and I did. My silence was my power, my boundaries my shield. The turning point came about 2 months into the legal proceedings. Ms. Wright called me into her office, her usually serious face breaking into a smile. "We've got them," she said, sliding a document across her desk. "Michael's lawyer has reached out for a settlement." I scanned the document, my heart racing. Michael was offering to buy me out of the house at a price well above market value. In exchange, he wanted a quick, uncontested divorce. There would be no further claims on either side, no prolonged court battle. What do you think? Ms. Wright asked, watching me carefully. It's a good offer, Ko. More than fair, actually. But the decision is yours. I sat back, my mind whirling. Part of me wanted to fight, to drag this out and make Michael pay for every moment of pain he had caused me. But as I thought about it, I realized something. This house, as much as I had loved it, was also filled with memories of a life I no longer wanted. I'll take it, I said, my voice steady. But I have one condition. I want to stay in the house for 30 days after the sale. I need to say goodbye properly. Ms. Wright nodded, understanding in her eyes. I think we can manage that. The next month was a blur of paperwork, negotiations, and preparations. But through it all, I felt a growing sense of peace. I was closing one chapter of my life, yes, but I was also opening a new one. A chapter where I was the author, where my boundaries were respected, where I could build the life I truly wanted. On my last night in the house, I threw a party. Not a big, lavish affair like Michael's ill-fated birthday, but a small gathering of the people who had supported me through this journey. Sarah was there, of course, along with Mrs. Johnson and a few other neighbors. Ms. Wright came too, letting her professional demeanor slip for once as she laughed and shared stories. As I looked around at these people, at the home I had fought for and was now choosing to leave, I felt a surge of emotion. This wasn't an ending, I realized. It was a beginning. I want to thank you all, I said, raising my glass in a toast. For your support, your kindness, and for reminding me of who I am. This house, it was worth fighting for. But I've realized that what's inside me, what's inside all of us, is even more valuable. Our strength, our dignity, our right to set boundaries and have them respected. That's what truly makes a home. There were tears and hugs, laughter and promises to stay in touch. And as the last guest left, I stood in the empty living room, running my hand along the sage green walls I had painted. Goodbye, I whispered, not to the house, but to the person I used to be. The person who had let others define her worth, who had accepted less than she deserved. That night, as I lay in bed for the last time in that house, I didn't feel sadness or regret. Instead, I felt a sense of anticipation. Tomorrow, I would walk out that door not as Michael's wife, not as Evelyn's daughter-in-law, but as Ko. Just Ko. Strong, resilient, and ready to face whatever came next. As I drifted off to sleep, my last thought was of the phrase that had carried me through these challenging months: boundaries are non-negotiable. And neither, I realized, was my happiness. The morning I left my old house for the last time, the sun was just peeking over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. I stood on the front porch, keys in hand, taking one last look at the place that had been the center of so much joy and pain. With a deep breath, I turned the key in the lock for the final time and walked away, not looking back. Sarah was waiting for me in her car, ready to drive me to my new apartment. As we pulled away from the curb, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. "You okay?" Sarah asked, glancing at me with concern. I nodded, surprising myself with how true it was. "Yeah, I really am," I replied, a small smile tugging at my lips. "It feels like I can breathe again." My new apartment was in a different part of Boston, a bustling neighborhood filled with young professionals and artists. It was smaller than my old house, but as I walked through the rooms, I felt a sense of possibility that I hadn't experienced in years. The first few weeks were a whirlwind of unpacking, arranging furniture, and settling into my new routine. I threw myself into decorating, choosing colors and styles that were entirely my own. No more compromising on decor or tiptoeing around Evelyn's opinions. Every choice I made was a celebration of my newfound freedom. One sunny Saturday, about a month after I'd moved in, Sarah came over to help me hang some artwork. As we stood back to admire our handiwork, she turned to me with a grin. "You know, I don't think I've ever seen you look so at peace," she said. I considered her words, realizing the truth in them. "I feel at peace," I admitted. "For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." That peace didn't mean the journey was over, though. There were still challenges to face and wounds to heal. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Larson, to work through the emotional aftermath of my marriage and divorce. Our sessions were often difficult, dredging up memories and feelings I'd tried to bury. It's normal to still have conflicting emotions about Michael, Dr. Larsson assured me during one particularly tough session. You shared a life with him. It's okay to mourn what you've lost while still being proud of the steps you've taken. Those words stayed with me, helping me navigate the complex emotions that sometimes threatened to overwhelm me. There were days when I missed the familiarity of my old life, when the loneliness of starting over felt crushing. But I reminded myself that loneliness was preferable to losing myself in a relationship that didn't value me. As the months passed, I slowly began to rediscover parts of myself that I had suppressed during my marriage. I took up painting again, something I had loved in college but had set aside when Michael complained about the mess and the time it took away from us. I joined a local book club, relishing in the intellectual discussions and new friendships I was forming. My graphic design business began to flourish as well. Without the constant stress of walking on eggshells at home, I found my creativity blossoming. I took on more challenging projects, pushing my skills to new levels. One day, as I was putting the finishing touches on a branding package for a new eco-friendly startup, I realized I was humming to myself, genuinely happy and engaged in my work. It wasn't all smooth sailing, of course. The legal aftermath of the divorce dragged on for a while, with occasional flare-ups when Michael or Evelyn tried to contest some aspect of the settlement. But Ms. Wright, true to form, handled each challenge with grace and determination. Remember, she told me after one particularly frustrating day of legal wrangling, every time they push back, it's just confirming that you made the right choice. You're not that person anymore, Ko. You're stronger now. And I was stronger. Each time I stood my ground, each time I refused to be manipulated or guilt-tripped, I felt my resolve grow. The woman who had once been so eager to please, so willing to compromise herself for the sake of peace, was gone. In her place was someone who knew her worth and wasn't afraid to demand respect. About 6 months after I'd moved into my new place, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Michael. For a moment, I considered throwing it away unopened, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside, I found a short note. Ko, I owe you an apology. I was wrong about so many things, and I'm sorry for the pain I caused you. I'm getting help, trying to understand why I acted the way I did. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I recognize my mistakes. I hope you're doing well. Michael, I sat with that letter for a long time, emotions swirling through me. There was a time when words like these would have weakened my resolve, made me consider giving our relationship another chance. But now, I recognized them for what they were, a step in Michael's journey, but not a reason to alter mine. I shared the letter with Dr. Larsson in our next session. How does it make you feel? She asked, watching me carefully. I thought about it for a moment. Validated, I finally said. And, a little sad, I guess. Sad for the relationship we could have had if he had realized these things sooner. But mostly, I feel free. Like this is the final confirmation that I made the right choice. Dr. Larsson nodded, a small smile on her face. That's growth, Ko. Being able to acknowledge the complex emotions without being controlled by them. As my first year of independence drew to a close, I decided to throw a party. Not a housewarming, I was well and truly settled by then, but a celebration of new beginnings. I invited Sarah, of course, and the friends I'd made in my book club. Mrs. Johnson came, having kept in touch despite the distance. I even invited Ms. Wright, who arrived with a bottle of champagne and a warm hug. As I looked around at the gathering, I was struck by how different it was from that fateful birthday party a year ago. There was laughter, genuine warmth, and a sense of easy camaraderie. These were people who valued me for who I was, not for who they wanted me to be. Raising my glass for a toast, I felt a swell of emotion. A year ago, I began, my voice slightly shaky. I thought my world was ending. I felt lost, betrayed, and alone. But standing here now, I realize that what I thought was an ending was really a beginning. I looked around at the smiling faces, feeling a surge of gratitude. Each of you has played a part in my journey, and I'm thankful for that. Here's to new beginnings, to self-discovery, and to the family we choose for ourselves. As glasses clinked and conversations resumed, Sarah sidled up to me. "You did it, Ko," she said softly. "You really did it." I smiled, realizing the truth in her words. I had done it. I'd faced my fears, stood up for myself, and built a life that was truly my own. The journey hadn't been easy, and I knew there would be more challenges ahead. But I was ready for them. Later that night, after the last guest had left and I was tidying up, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was different from the one who had stood in shock, covered in birthday cake, a year ago. This woman stood taller, her eyes clearer and more confident. She had weathered a storm and come out stronger on the other side. As I got ready for bed, I thought about the concept of home. I had fought so hard for a house, thinking it was the key to my happiness. But I realized now that home wasn't about a physical space. It was about feeling safe, valued, and true to oneself. Crawling into bed, I felt a deep sense of contentment. Tomorrow was a new day, full of possibilities. And for the first time in a long time, I was excited to see what it would bring. As I drifted off to sleep, I smiled to myself. This wasn't just a new chapter, it was a whole new book, and I couldn't wait to write it.